Hello. Um, I'm going to walk you through a piece I did a couple days ago, and I got the idea that I just wanted to do a piece that relied solely or as much as possible on these Cwejman modules. I know I'm not saying his name correctly, so forgive me, but that's how I've heard everybody else say it. So uh, somebody tell me how to pronounce Cwejman. I'd appreciate it. Anyways. So I'm just gonna. It was a long piece that I did the other day, but even so, are some little things in here that I don't think I got to fully explore. So, especially with these guys, some of the effects units, I think that kind of got lost. So I'm just gonna walk through each element, show how I did it, and let's get started here. So this was the heart of the first element, which was a drone. And this is running the Ansible module that's set to levels, I think it's called. And it's like a little sequencing piece of software or a patch for the ARC. So you hit the buttons in a certain way and you get the mode that it's in. So I have these set. That means it's set to scale. And then you can set the scale that it's set to. So this is kind of I'm in the key of C, but it's based off the notes of the A flat, basically is what's happening there. So I kind of use that as the basis for the whole thing. I forget what mode that is, the flat 6 mode. And then it will show you, press this other button, that's how long your sequence is. And then these are the play and write heads and where it is for you to play and set each step that it's moving along there. So we come back out and you can see the notes along here are changing as it clips along. It's being progressed by the variegate. So I have a few different settings in here that's moving it along, and then it's also playing an envelope that will play it. So let's start to bring that in a little bit, and I'll show you what's creating the sound as well. Using the performance mixer, which is awesome. So bring that in, so with no effects. That's going through, the effects on that are the EOS reverb. Try to keep it light. Okay, so the sound source for this one, the mighty QMMF4 and the PH8. So sending 3 signals out. Let's solo them up. So the first one is set really just to more of a traditional filter mode. They're all tuned. The oscillator's tuned to C, and the resonators on these 2 channels are also kind of tuned to C, and they're tracking 1 volt per octave, but this one's just passing the signal through. So that's one signal, kind of the clean oscillator from the PH8. This one is just kind of resonating it, and it's playing, I think that one's playing the second note pattern, and then the third one is set to a lower tone. So all 3 are playing different notes that kind of create a series of chords, more or less, kind of resonating bell-like chords. So I'll bring them all in. That one's kind of soft. There it is. So you can kind of hear some of the rubs that start to happen in the third one. Okay, so this is all going into one side of the MMF2 over here, so I can control the whole, filter the whole thing a little bit. And that's where I have the rhythm coming from here. That's playing the quadra. That's where it's kind of hitting it, pinging it or whatever. Let's do that a little bit. So turn this down, turn up the envelope. And then, let's see, Start to get some saturation in there. Okay, so let's put the effects back on here. Turn this down a little bit. A little more subtle. That's how I had it kind of playing, more or less. By the way, everything is also, the whole mix of the mixer is going into the this kind of mix. What do they call it? The send and return. The whole thing is going through the IntelliGel audio interface, then through the old analog heat, and trying to use it subtly for some filter stuff here and there. And it's just barely dry the end. So this is dry. And then here it is, just a little bit of enhancement. And you can just do a little filtering. That's kind of a nice effect on it. Okay, so that's the drone, the pulsing drone. Let's get into the rhythm. It's gonna be a long video. I better speed it up here. So the first thing I did was turn that down. Got this hat, and that's being the rhythm's all being programmed by the Eloquencer, which is fantastic. And I've got 3 parts programmed in here. I'm in kind of part mode, which basically each one's just playing a couple patterns to make the rhythms a little longer. So I have a kick, pseudo kick, snare, and I'm in the hat. So the hat is it's the RG6 sending some noise out into the PH, the VCA2P, and I think you can hear it kind of panning around. Let's take the effects off of this. Oh, the effects are off. So you can hear it panning. The Batumi is synced. Everything, by the way, is being clocked by Pamela's workout. So the Batumi is getting some sync, and that is panning information. I had to use another envelope for this one, so I ran out of envelopes in my Cwejman stuff, so I'm using a dual ADSR, and that is controlling the envelope of the hat. And then lastly, it's going through the amount of that is going through the attenuator, or whatever you call this thing, quad attenuator, ATT4. So I managed to use every module, every Cwejman module, which was kind of fun to do. So that's a hat. And then the cool thing about, I'm also modulating the clock rate, which kind of varies the sound a little bit. Let's open this up so you can hear the sound. Actually, we can do this. So you can hear the sound. You can kind of vary the clock rate, which gives you some different textures. Slew rate. And slow. That is very badass. So anyways, that's being the rate's being modulated a little bit. Alright, let's turn that back to how it was. Get the envelope back. Now let's get into the fun stuff, the kick and the snare. So how can we turn down the okay, so what's happening here is kick is, let's move this over. Kick is also programmed from the Eloquencer, and it's hitting the my favorite envelope. This sucker, simply awesome. So you've got the whole, and then this is the sound source for the kick is the MMF6. So it's resonating. Hard saturation. And now something you're going to notice with the sound is the release is being modulated. Different notes have different lengths. And that was coming from the CV out of the Eloquencer. So that was programmed in there. and you can see going in here with the release modulation. So it gives it a little more dynamics. But the control of this guy is just fantastic. Okay, with the hold is really useful. One thing you have to watch out for with this is if you have the attack set all the way as fast as it'll go, sometimes it's so fast, sometimes you'll get hard clicks. And I tend to not notice them as much when I'm listening in headphones, and then I'll listen to it on speakers, and suddenly you'll hear this hard, unpleasant click. That's snagged me a couple times, so watch out for that. Maybe you get less of it if you go to exponential mode. Probably. It'll loop if you want it to, but anyways. So when I did the piece of the day, I started with the release really long, and it was almost like a bass drum. Play with the symmetry then. And then I slowly tightened it up. Alright, so that's the kick. The kick and the snare are both going up into the MX4S. And actually, that is where I'm also kind of using it as a VCA on the kick. So the envelope signal is being multed out of the envelope and also controlling the level of the kick. So I just use the left and right as a kind of molt here and send one channel into the mixer, and then one channel goes into the side chain input of the compressor, the DP2 compressor. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So that's the kick. And then for the snare, pseudo snare sound, let me adjust this mic again. Okay, for the pseudo snare, I'm using the BLD. More just the noise from it. Let's turn that up. Sometimes the signal from the BLD is kind of low, and I've talked to a few people about that over the years. Sometimes if you hit it with some extra voltage into the velocity input, it will raise, just static voltage, it'll raise the level. I'm trying to do that a little bit. I think I used the maths down there to crank it, and that still wasn't giving me enough, so it gave me an excuse to use the AP1. So I'm both compressing it a little bit, but mainly just boosting the signal. But it turns out, man, it was plenty. So that's just noise from the BLD, little cutoff filter there. There's hardly no oscillator being used. It's got a little modulation from one of the envelopes. So that's the snare, pretty basic. Going into the MX4 as well. It's going to the mixer and going up to the side chain input. So that's kind of it for the rhythm. Oh yeah, I think it's also going to the right side of the MMF too. So so I can control the filtering on the kick and snare together. So I had just a little reverb on that, I think. So put the hat back in with it. So pretty basic. I know my rhythms are basic and I need to work on that. I'm not even in the same galaxy as a Richard Devine, but I tend to focus a little more on melodies and that side of things, and I need to work on my rhythmic development, varying it up a little bit. Should use the variegated more. Okay. All right. So that's the rhythm. I think I covered everything with that. So let's turn those guys down, and now we've got the three kind of melodic parts, and those bring in the bass. Bass rhythm. Let's turn it up. It's coming in stereo. Let's try this. See, I really know what I'm doing, don't I? There we go. All right, so let's talk about this a little bit. The bass, is the VCO6, and I've got a couple of the outputs. Let's lengthen the envelope. Okay, a couple of outputs of the VCO6. The square wave that's being pulse width modulated for NICBAT, and then just a saw going into the two inputs of the MMF1S. And this is great. Got some saturation happening. You really hear it if you go into these different filter modes. Right now it's just in basic low pass. Let's go to this cool shape that I like a lot. And you'll really hear the squelching. Well, not on this part as much. Let's go to a different part that's more active. Well, it's not giving me much right now, but we'll come back to it later because we'll hear it. Okay, but anyways, that's the bass part. Pretty basic. No pun intended. Oh, maybe if I had this up, that would have given us more. There we go. That sound. So you hear it kind of cutting in and out, and that was intentional. So sounds kind of fluty with just the square wave, or like a clarinet, I guess. Okay, let's turn that back down, kind of where it was. Okay, so all the melodic parts are going into the VCA4MX, and they are going, we talked about it earlier, up to the DP2, which is being sidechained by that kick and snare. And then that is all going into the SPH2, which I'll show you in a little bit, and then to the mixer, which right now has no effects on it, but we'll put some effects back on there in a second. So that's the bass, the VCO6 and the MF1S. And then there are two kind of arpeggiator melodic parts. Let's hear those. Let's go back to part one. Turn the bass down. Same thing here. You're going to kind of, it sounds like there's something wrong with it, like it's cutting in and out, but that's just the side chain. And when you put it all together, it kind of achieves the effect I was going for, that kind of vibey side chain sound. So this is coming from the second track of the sequencer, and the two melodic parts are being played by the 2RM, and they split out and use each side of the DMF2. And the envelopes for those are the two sides of the ADSR VC2. So that's one we're hearing there. It's got a little FM modulation on it from a mouse, just to give it a little warble. Filter. But yeah, you can hear it being grabbed by this. You don't see it as much, but anyways. So that's one, and then let's hear the other one, the other part. So what I did with these two parts, let's talk about the sequencer for a second. Let's get some effects on there. By the way, the effects are channel 1, output 1 is going to the Rainmaker, and 2 is going to the EOS like we talked about before. And I'm using a little bit of both, split on these two stereo outs. Okay, so let's talk about this sequencer. The thing that I didn't realize about the sequencer going into it was it's kind of reminiscent of the Monami, I don't know if he calls them patches or applications, Kriya, which calls it polyphasic, which means each track, when you switch patterns in the Kriya at least, which typically runs on the grids, does run on the grids, each track can have its own length, and they can, be overlapping, and you get like the Steve Reich interweaving patterns, which, most sequencers will do. This guy will do it. But what I didn't realize, it took me a couple days, and I was really scratching my head, is that patterns with this guy are totally independent for each track. So when you go from pattern 1 to pattern 2, you would think that all the tracks would be following you along to that new pattern. But that's not the case. The way you program it and the way it's set up, if you could go to pattern 2 and track 1 could be doing its own thing and track 2 could still be playing pattern 1. I don't know if that makes sense, but patterns and tracks are decoupled. And furthermore, each pattern on a track has its own length. Everything is independent, so it has its own amount of steps, and each step has its own duration and its own gate. So every element is totally separate from one another, which is great, but can also be very confusing. And for me, it helps to kind of have a little bit of a roadmap going in. I don't know how that Colin Benders just jams with this thing, but he's very experienced, and it's pretty amazing what he does with it. So that's happening, and then the way you create different scenes or sequences is you've really got to use this sidecar guide, the 102, and you can program parts. So then a part could be considered a sequence, but a part could be like track 1 playing pattern 1 and 2 and cycling through those, or certain parts, looping certain parts, which you can set. And then track 2 could be playing pattern 3, and so on. So it's really all independent. Took me a while to get my head wrapped around it, but now that I really love it, and I love the idea. And so what's happening here is I programmed a melody that's playing on the first guy, which coincidentally uses a D, and a D is not in our original, if you remember our original scale, but it just sounded good to me. So there's probably some more rubbing going on in there, but so be it. So that's the melody, and then I copied that melody over to the other part. So that's on track 2. Copied it over here, and when I copied it to the other track, I altered the length of some of the durations. So if you listen, sometimes they're together and then they'll drift apart. So that's kind of going on, and that more or less happens throughout. I get to one point where I basically double or quadruple time the second part, and it becomes a really fast arpeggio. I think that's on the third part. So this is how you kind of cue up different parts, yeah. So same notes, just going double speed, I think. Really hit a side chain in there, in the basin. Alright, guess you can bring in some of the rhythm. Oops, change that. One thing that I really haven't nailed down with this, working this way, is how to best handle the resets. Because it does want to line up with the rhythm in a certain way, and I'm not sure the best way to handle that. I know you can, I have it being reset when I first start the clock, but then as you're changing, and I know you can have it start the new part based on how you have this set, but it still wasn't quite locking in like I wanted to. So there were a couple moments when I had to re-trigger it. Anyways, but that's all of it together. So let's go back to part 1 here. Let's do user. This is manual. And that's kind of a manual reset on it. That's together. You'll hear them start to drift apart. wanted to show you the effects a little bit. Let's do that lap for the end. So the melodic content is coming out of the compressor and going into the SPH2. Really cool sounding phaser. It's got a little LFO in it. It's really cool sound. But I was just using it kind of subtly to give it some subtle stereoization. It's cool though. And this was on the drone, and the speed of this one, frequency shifter, also really cool sound. Go to audio rate. Cool sound. And I was modulating the speed a couple ways, both with the envelope follower from the snare, which turned out to be kind of a subtle effect, but I was trying to tie the speed of that to the rhythm a little bit, but I don't think it came across at all. You can hear it speeding up if you listen closely. Yeah, so it's kind of cool. Anyways, those are neat. I wanted to show you those. So I think I covered everything. All this stuff. Yeah, so that's about it. It was really fun to do, and it's always fun to kind of limit yourself. This is a lot to limit myself to, but it's always fun to set some limitations and then see what you can do working within that. But I hope it was interesting, and if so, maybe I'll do more of these in the future.